Hi everyone, welcome to Workshop 5, our penultimate episode in our 6-part series. And today we're talking about talent, so people. We're going through some crazy times. I'm not going to harp on too much about what's going on in the world. I think everyone's covered that and probably not better than I have and in more detail. But what we want to talk about today is really about how you retain people, but also what the landscape's going to look like post Covid-19 or post the lockdown periods, and when there is a degree of normality. So, how is that going to change your business when it comes to talent? Not only from how you hire, but who you hire, where you hire, and how you retain, because these are all fundamental parts of any business. I know a number of people on this call have got sort of hiring freezes across their businesses, which is quite understandable. But that's not going to last forever. At least I hope it doesn't. Otherwise, I'm going to be looking for a new job. But pretty confident that things will start to ease up. We were just talking offline in Germany, which is where Melanie's based, and I'll introduce you to everyone in a moment. But the restrictions are starting to ease, certainly in some parts, other parts of Europe, Northern Europe. There's also some relaxation in terms of the restrictions. So hopefully that will spur on some kind of economic normality. But listen, none of us have crystal balls, and no one knows what's going to happen. But we're going to talk today about talent. So without further ado, just a quick agenda for this afternoon's session. So a quick recap on the 6-week series, introductions to our panelists today. Then we're going to go through your team, so how your team feeling, and how to measure that really in current climate. Obviously, the world has become smaller, but what does that mean for you and your businesses, and what does that mean for talent in your business? What are the risks? Because there are some noticeable ones now, and perhaps one or two that may not have been chaired at some of your Exco meetings, but I think we'd like to address some of those and talk through potentially some solutions. And then a subject that obviously is very close to my heart, which is obviously talent acquisition. But, are we now in a war for jobs, or are we in a war for talent? I'm not going to give you a spoiler on that one. Well, you're going to have to wait and find out what my view is. So we'll come on to that at the end, and then a Q&A session just to finish off. So just a recap, if anyone's joining for the first time, this is the 5th episode in our 6-part series. We've covered a variety of different topics over the last 5 weeks, starting with Andreas from Peach Payments here in South Africa. Actually, he's in Germany, funny enough. But anyway, he's got a South African business, and we're talking about how to retain your merchants, how to help them really through this crisis. Then we were talking about product improvement with Piotr from Opera FinTech over in Poland, and he was giving some really insightful views on why it's actually a really good time to re-look at your product offering, re-look at your consumers, and look at your merchants. Then we were joined by Nick Small. If anyone here on this session is looking at raising funding or has any questions regarding investment in businesses, I would highly recommend having a watch of that video by Nick. Nick is a private equity investor with a very large portfolio across the fintech sector in emerging markets, with a focus in Africa, and he gave some really good tips and a matrix as well, which I know a number of people have benefited from. Last week we were joined by Maier from Israel. We were also joined by Brett, and I apologize, I've not updated this slide from Hepstar, and we were talking about how you now look at your business and start to put plans in place for when things do get back to, I keep saying this, some degree of normality, the new normal as other people are classing this, and who knows what that's going to be. But again, trying to put in some positive reinforcements and some positive plans about how you can ready your entity, your business unit, if that's relevant to what's going to be an upturn. Then today, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. I'm going to say my old friend Simon. I mean that with the greatest respect, Simon. But so Simon and Findexible, have been great partners with us for this series. We've also formed a closer collaboration, which Simon may talk about. If it's right now, that's fine. We can announce that when we send out an email a bit later on. And Simon, I'll let you do an intro in a minute, but in true workshop form, Melanie, ladies first. Would you like to give yourself a bit of an intro and tell us a bit about your background, where you are at the moment, and kind of your interest and experience in the world of talent?
Okay. So first of all, thanks for having me on our panel today, Darren. And yeah, my name is Melanie. I'm based in Munich, and I've been in the payment industry, fintech industry for quite a while now. I worked for Wirecard for more than 6 years, and now I've been with Entersekt, which is also a South African company, but very strong in Europe. And I'm looking after all our pre-sales activities in the European DACH region. And throughout my career, really early on, started building teams and developing teams. This is why this panel is very close to my heart and to my passion, really for leadership and seeing the whole person, not just an employee. And then on the side, I've started to work as a career coach as well. And I'm helping people to advance their careers, really tap into their skills, into their strength, what do they care about, and then build a career in alignment with that, but also go into action, ask for what you want and what you deserve, because promotions don't just come knocking on your door. Usually you have to knock that door first. But it's also always it's very important to have a balance in your life, and not only career, but also look at other aspects of your life. And in coaching, there's this whole person approach. And I think now in a time of crisis, and generally when we talk about new work, how do we want to work in the future, it's very important that companies start to adopt that approach and see their employees as a whole person with their whole personality, with their life inside and outside of work. And now that we all stuck at home, but somehow, you get insights on where do people live, how does it look in their background, kids come running in. So everything is melting and merging. And so, yeah, that's why I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining all the way from Germany. And now we're going to go the other direction, all the way over from Israel. Simon, would you like to give a bit of an intro?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Darren, and good to be back again. I'm Simon. I think some of you that are on the call today have probably been on previous weeks, but just for those of you that haven't, Findexable is an early stage fintech data company. We're building a global database, a real-time database of fintech firms. We think that's useful because at the moment it doesn't exist. It's very hard to see where innovation is coming from, and from a talent point of view, we also this situation, whatever we call it, and what comes next, is going to unlock talent corridors perhaps in a way that we've never possibly experienced since the very beginnings of the internet about 20 years ago. So I think the sort of the relevance to us personally as a business, but also to the marketplace of this conversation is really timely. So I think we can have some a really good discussion. And I would say to anybody that's that's joined us this morning, send us some questions, because these are great opportunities to identify and connect with people and understand how people are feeling, or try and ask us challenging questions, because that's what we're here for.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. So I've just moved on a slide, and I've realised that I haven't updated this to May 2020, but I think the same thing still applies, really. Again, I'm not going to harp on about the state of the payments industry. I think everyone knows what that is now, and if you don't, please watch some previous episodes where we cover that in quite some detail. But what I wanted to do was talk about this is what the payments industry, or the fintech industry is facing. And when we look at talent, we look at people within the business. What does that mean for them? Well, quite honestly, it means exactly the same thing. They're fearing exactly the same things as you are as business leaders, as you are as business owners. You know, they're worried about job losses. They're worried about, or they have fear. You know, they've got financial constraints. They are in crisis management mode. That they've had to pivot and change their lives to accommodate working in these crazy times. As Simon just said, you know, to have you know, kids running in on Zoom meetings, and to have dogs barking when someone goes to the front door and you're in the middle of a call. You know, these are all you know, concerns that people have got, and trying to get over the biggest thing. But I think for me, and Melanie, I'd like to bring you in on this, but if there's one aspect that we've seen, I've certainly seen in my team, and I've seen in sort of our clients, is stress and stress management, and being able to cope with all these different types of situations that, you know, we find ourselves literally dropped into. You know, no one had any time to prepare for this or get any sort of mindset. Again, apologies about this sun. It's a really bad time of day, and I've just got this ray of sun coming. I'm trying to sort of duck away from it. But Melanie, can you give a bit of a sort of minute or two on sort of stress and what you've seen, maybe within your team at Entersekt, or within the sort of wider sector?
Yeah, sure. So I think you're right. It's you know, everything is new. It happened from one day to the other. It's scary. We're concerned, and so naturally there's a lot of stress. So what I found to be very helpful, some things that my company did very well, but I also did some kind of research throughout my network, friends. It's really open communication with your whole team, and also from top management to everyone, and say, look, this is the situation. It is bad, it is what it is, but this is how we manage the situation as a company, so you don't have to be in a state of fear over whether you're going to lose your job or not. So I found this to be very, very helpful, because there's a lot of fear anyway. So whatever you can do as a company, over communicate, have open communication, be really, really transparent. And you can go as far as to say, well, we did the numbers, and for the next X amount of months, we look very good, even if we don't do any new sales. So, you know, what your numbers might be, depending on your business and your situation. And then also be empathetic, right? And it goes back to, well, your private life and your work life, it all merged, and it might not be very easy to ease into that new home office situation. So I think now we all manage that transition. Some companies might have done a better job in aiding their employees while doing that, but now it's sort of, you know, we've all survived in home office, but it's still, especially if you have kids and they can't go to school, they can't go to daycare. So what Entersekt did very well, for example, is they introduced temporary parental leave. So depending on how many kids you have, depending on how old they are, you will just get some extra day of holidays that you can take to kind of ease the extra load that's happening at the moment. So those two ideas that I thought worked very well to deal with stress.
And I think it's important, though, that we kind of make it clear that everyone deals with stress and deals with situations very differently. Okay. And I think because of a lot of, you know, the pure nature of fintechs is that we have lots of different generations within the business, right? From Generation Z all the way through to baby bloomers, and perhaps some others as well in the mix. So people are going to be dealing with this in a very different way. And I think one thing that I've seen quite a few interesting businesses do is send out some sort of, say, survey, but some sort of pulse. So, you know, forgetting about, you know, how's work, but how are you as a person? How are you feeling? What are your struggles? You know, and there's a couple of links I've put onto this slide here, Mindful and Orchestrated, a couple of free tools that you can just sort of download or subscribe to and add in your users and send that out. And it just allows you to, especially if you're managing teams or, you know, you have responsibility for, you know, individuals, just to really understand what their mindset is, what really are the challenges that the people are going through. I'm going to say something in here as well, because we're working on this today, but we're trying to form, or we are forming a kind of a health check survey, not a medical one. I've got to be honest, it's not medical, but this is about, you know, how people within the fintech and payment sector across emerging markets and the markets we operate in, what are their fears, and what are their struggles, and you know, how are they coping with these types of situations? And what we hope to do off that is put up a white paper and be able to give a slightly sort of helicopter view on the state of people's mindsets, and that'll be rolling out in the next week or so. But Simon, anything to add on that? I know obviously Findexible's a small business, you know, it's embryonic, but you've got lots of clients who you know, are, you know, much bigger, right? You know, from sort of the big banks all the way through to, you know, the large payments companies. Are you seeing them engaging with their teams and their talent people in this sort of way, or are people a little aloof?
No, I think I can't speak for the you know, for the banks, but I sense it's the same in big companies. Certainly, sort of founders, you know, the sort of more entrepreneurial end of financial services are definitely seeing, you know, they were already kind of remote enabled. They probably weren't working remotely to the degree they've had to the last few weeks, but they were, you know, remote able. That's for sure. So I guess it's been sort of, you know, less of an institutional shock, but no less of a psychological one. And I think they are talking to, you know, they are finding you know, a way to. The big challenge with this is you've got two very difficult dynamics, haven't you? You have one, which is where people are forced at home, so people are feeling remote anyway. And then there's the uncertainty of the situation, which is compounding pressure, stress, anxiety. And if you're a manager, of course, you know, you've possibly got some financial pressures. You've either got to deliver results, or you've got to make redundancies, or you've got to understand where the money is coming from. So, you know, yes, they are certainly engaging with one another in an effective way. I think some of the calls we've had on these webinars over the last few weeks, you know, people have sort of shared the tricks they're using. They're trying to do more one-to-one conversations, because Zoom is pretty good as a one-to-one mechanism, actually. Obviously have bigger groups for you know, to sort of key updates, but to try and sort of make the connection via one-to-ones. And then I think, you know, I think really think back to Nick Small's point with his crisis management matrix. You know, the really difficult challenge, of course, is to try and plan for something for which you have no visibility of what tomorrow is going to look like. But you know, the real advantage of the situation is that people do feel connected to their companies, because they care about what they're generally, you know, if they respect their team or a lot of people they work with, they feel connected to their companies, and they do want to work together. So for you as a manager, you know, it's really, you know, this is an opportunity to say, you know, providing you can come up with a way to manage the message with them, this is an opportunity to bind the team together. And if you can come up with a plan together, I think you can ultimately sort of reduce or release some of that anxiety and manage that, you know, and manage that stress collectively.
I agree. And that's good sort of lead on to the next point, which I think we want to spend a bit of time talking about today, which is, you know, the world has become smaller, but what does that mean, right? There's a lot of catchphrases being thrown around everywhere, right? I'm not even going to try and list them off, but, you know, the world has become smaller, but from a talent perspective, there's some huge benefits to your businesses. And there's a couple actually that I thought of after creating this slide. So, you know, you're no longer geographically restricted in terms of where you can get talent from. You know, there are some countries where immigration is very, very challenging. You know, certainly here in South Africa, to get a work permit is a challenge, not only for the individual, but for the business. If the world has become smaller, which undoubtedly it has, access to a large talent or a global talent pool has now become available. If you're in South Africa at the moment, and let's use Cape Town as an example, I've got maybe an office in the southern suburbs, and historically, or looking at it a few months ago, I would only really be able to hire people within my locality. I wouldn't even be able to consider people from the northern suburbs, for example, or from Johannesburg. If I've only got one office in Cape Town, I'd have to relocate people. Same as in we look at Kenya. So there's some amazing fintech companies and payments companies there, and historically they've wanted people in their offices. So it means a relocation. Now, relocation to some parts of Africa just isn't on the agenda for some people. It's just not feasible because the world's become smaller and people have become more accustomed to not only working remotely, but managing a business remotely. And I think that's one of the key things here. You now perhaps have more access or wider access to the best talent. So you're not necessarily just looking at the best talent in your local area. You're now looking at the best talent on the planet, obviously time zone and linguistics dependent, but you really do have that access. And I think there are some challenges with that, which we'll come on to shortly. But Melanie, I know you've been working remotely, working from home for quite some time before all this, nonsense, before all this kicked off, right? So you're kind of a veteran. Now you're working for a South African business. You're based in Germany. How does that work for you? What was Entersekt's reasoning for hiring you in Germany as opposed to hiring someone here in South Africa, focusing on the German market? Probably quite an obvious answer, but anyway, I'll let you answer it.
Yeah, so that's true. When I joined Entersekt, it's only 2 people in Munich. So by default, we've always been remote workers, but we have an office in Utrecht as well, where we have our European headquarters. So I had like a mixed thing, but headquarter very far away, but then the European headquarter easily accessible. And now I have no idea when it's the next time I can go to Utrecht, but that's a different story. And it just had very practical reasons that they want to have local people in Europe, because it goes back to what you said. You have to have the network, you have to understand how the market works, and if you've only worked in South Africa, you just don't have that knowledge and you don't have the network, which is, it's natural. So that's a benefit when you can set up your workforce like that and can hire people right on the spot, rather than having someone who is being sent from the headquarter to kind of scout the area and then build something there. You just far quicker to do that. And then to build strong relationships with customers as well as partners, which is very important for us. And then to that point, I've never really thought about, because for me it was just so normal. Wirecard was a bit different. There was more focus on the headquarter, but I think now this will also change, that companies realize, well, you can still do business even if people work from home. And when you say, this is a great opportunity, the world is becoming smaller, and you can, use that to go and hire people where you need that talent, and make the whole process easier. But you then need, as a company, you really need to change how you work together. And I can't go into too much detail here, because I think that would take up too much time, almost a whole session. But I came across the founder of WordPress and Automatic. He's called Matt Mullenweg. He even has a podcast. So just Google Matt Mullenweg WordPress and distributed working. So, we've used the phrase remote working came up here in our conversation. And then Matt Mullenweg said, no, remote is actually, it has a connotation that you just removed. So he's talking about distributed work, and he's built a 900-person company with no offices at all and employs across 68 countries. And if you want to have a good case study and get inspired of, how do you actually do that, and how do you set up a company that is driven by giving people autonomy, how to work in the first place, and then work from a perspective that talent and intelligence is equally distributed throughout the world. And there's just some ways you need to take into consideration when you want to go this path, even beyond that crisis, that when you have a truly distributed work team, you can't just copy and paste office structures into digital channels. So you need to think more about how do we communicate. So communication, documentation gets really, really important. And also getting used to the idea that not everything has to happen at the same time all the time. And so if you want to look into his work, there are 5 levels of autonomy for distributed workforce. Very, very interesting, very inspiring.
Certainly is. I think, Simon, you mentioned a company, Zapier, didn't you? I think on the last webinar, who have again built their business without any physical offices. So companies have been doing this for a while, and I don't think that's probably a slight exception. But I think when we're looking at a traditional business, so a company that's been established for, I don't know, a year or two more, how do you make that transition into this new sort of distributed working environment? And I think, companies have had sort of hubs and spokes, haven't they? A bit like Entersekt, you said you've got a regional HQ in Utrecht, and, obviously Wirecard, who used to work for, have got HQ in Munich, and then they've got the regional offices, obviously one in South Africa, and the big regional office in the US and in Singapore. But I think what we're talking perhaps about here is actually opening that even wider to say, hey, listen, you can be in, I don't know, somewhere in Indonesia, right? Nowhere near any office or any sort of sub office or anything like that. As long as you've got internet connectivity, actually you can do the work. If you're the best product manager, or you are the best business analyst, or you are the best whatever you may be, you don't physically have to be in the office anymore. So being able to think like that, but I think the whole sort of onboarding, which we'll come on to shortly, how do you onboard people when it comes to, this light is driving me insane. How do you onboard people in this kind of environment, from the junior level all the way up to the senior level? And there are different challenges, which I think we'll come to in a moment. Simon, anything to add on that one before we go on to the next slide? Because I think that's kind of looking at risks.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think I agree with both what you're saying. I mean, I think there are two things which have really stopped the progress of of the positive stuff that might come out of this with regard to talent previously, aren't there? I mean, there's you've had a culture, a kind of institutional culture, which is prioritized, not trusting their employees basically because they don't trust them to work at home. That's compounded a kind of personal mindset where you think, well, I can't work from home because the boss won't allow me to, one, and two, I'm not sure if I would really like that. And then you've had this other sort of situation where, as a fast-growing company or a scaling company, you're valued at a discount if you don't have a workforce that's in one location, because companies want to buy, investors want to buy into a business that they can see, they can touch, and where the people are together. Of course, what's happened here is, that's been quite literally been blown apart, and that's an opportunity for managers that can see it, and I think for companies that can get it right, there's absolutely enormous opportunities. I mean, we've had, what have we had, 20 odd years, I suppose, of an Indian outsourcing business, and all that's really happening now is possibly a better quality. I don't know, that sounds like a mean thing to say, but an extension of that, where actually we can get access. A company in an emerging region or a poorer country, or a country that has a poor technology talent pool, let's say, can get access to a much broader variety of people. So I think, possibly over the longer term, what I think and what I'd like to see really is a kind of, a much more digital network or digital network of corridors for talent. And I think that will play to the strengths of, bright people, bright companies, and, countries that have got, good people with good ideas, but have got limited resources. And I think that's quite an exciting prospect.
I agree. I agree. We're going to move on to the next slide. I promise we're going to keep on time today because we've overrun for quite a few. So we're going to try and keep on time. There are some risks though, and risks to your business. So if you are in an emerging market, or you're in South Africa, which is a market in itself, what are the risks given everything that Simon's just said? So you as an emerging market, you have access to a wider talent pool, but let's think about companies in markets that have already emerged in developed countries. There was always this talk of brain drain, and brain drain was taking talent out of one country. South Africa has been has gone through that for many years across many sectors, medical, engineering, IT. And there's been this physical brain drain. So this is taking people out of the country and immigrating them into other regions, other countries. Now, are we saying here that because of what's happening here, and people are now used to working in distributed environments, working from home, actually there may not be a physical brain drain, as in people may not actually be emigrating, so having to uproot their families. There's a lot of people, very talented people here in Cape Town that I know are contacted prior to all this happening, probably weekly, about opportunities in Europe, but actually they love Cape Town. They don't want to leave Cape Town. They'd love to earn dollars, but they don't want to leave Cape Town. I think now what's going to happen is that's going to open up. People will say, you know what, we really want you to join our business. It doesn't matter where you're based. We're kind of used to working remotely, so you stay in Cape Town, and listen, we're happy to pay you what we would pay anyone if they were in our HQ or in our regional office, be that in London, be that in Munich, be that in Dubai, be that wherever it may be, because we don't physically need you to move. We might need you to come for the odd meeting. Who knows when that's going to be allowed, and when that's going to be commercially viable to do that anyway. So I think there's going to be a brain drain of sorts, but perhaps not quite as impactful on the local economies, because if you're earning a higher salary, as long as you're doing everything legitimately and legally, you should be paying higher taxes. So, SARS here in South Africa should be a little bit happier. But companies here in South Africa, those fintechs, those payments companies here that are so reliant on and struggle so hard to get talent, are they now going to be competing against their European counterparts for the same talent? I think I know the answer to that. Time will tell, but that's going to be an interesting dynamic. Not only are you competing with local players, but you're also going to be competing with internationals. We've seen that happening in pockets over the years. Amazon have obviously impacted the South African tech market quite heavily over the last 3 or 4 years. I think the fintech sector's going to get hit as well. I'm going to get hit quite hard. There's going to be a lot of talent that's going to be working for maybe not even one company, but maybe trying this sort of gig work and working on multiple opportunities. So I think that's going to be a threat. I'd be interested if anyone of the audience has got any views on that. That'd be great. Melanie, Simon, keen to get your thoughts on this. Am I just talking hot air and I don't know, I'm kind of had too much sunlight maybe, or do you think there's some truth in that? And then we're going to talk about some of the other risks as well.
Well, I think there is. I think talent is going to become a bit of a two-way street. The whole kind of brain drain thing, rather, is going to become a bit more two-way. At least, I think it should do, because I think that's to Melanie's point about a distributed workforce. That's the best way to distribute wealth more evenly than it's been over the last decade. When we talk about talent, and we talk about loyalty, don't we? I think one of the nice things about the outcomes of this sort of lockdown period is the kind of the humanity that's begun to sort of seep back into particularly Western culture, which has become so sort of commercially oriented. We see this whole kind of concept of seeing people in their homes or distracted by kids or pets in the background. That it's brought some humility and some humanity to it. And I would like to think that in the longer term, over the next couple of years, managers will start to really think, well, actually, if I'm to get loyalty from my staff, that requires quite a different contract between me, or between us, or me, the manager, and us, the business, and the employee. We have to think differently about how we engage, motivate, reward, compensate, whatever the word is, our staff and our teams. And you know, technology, for example, whether fintech or other, for a long time, certainly over the last decade, you know, during this last sort of decade of a startup boom, you know, because of this challenge of access to talent, you know, there has been this move away from just paying people high salaries, in fact, quite often not paying people high salaries, but giving them a stake in the company, this sort of equity ownership model, compared to what ended up with the financial crisis of 2008, paying massive salaries and often undeserved bonuses. And so, you know, I think one of the you know, to cut a long story short, you know, the outcome of this, I would like to see a more stakeholder-driven, partnership-driven model of employment, where individuals start to feel that they have a stake in their company, because that's ultimately the only way that you can, you know, really effectively motivate and manage a remote workforce or a distributed workforce, whatever you want to call it.
Great. Melanie.
I couldn't agree more, especially on the aspect of humanity and bringing more humanity into the workplace, even if it's a distributed workplace. And I think it goes back to what I said in the beginning, that we have to look at your people, not just an employee number, as a whole person. And now with, you know, you have kids at home and dogs and everything is merging. So it becomes very obvious, which has been the case along anyway. And I think if you realize that, and if you get that right as a company, that will keep your people loyal. And yes, also, you know, you said, what about intellectual property? You know, if people are loyal and to your company and feel connected, that for me, that kind of solves that problem. And you know, going forward, I think it's great that we say, oh, they're distributed companies and everyone works wherever they want. But some people like to have that feeling, you know, I'm part of a special culture, I'm part of a gang, I want to drink the Kool-Aid every day, I walk into the office. And so how do you strike that balance and give people that feeling of culture, even though you might be going into you know, a more distributed workforce trend? And culture is something that's very intangible anyway. And now if you don't really have these human connections, human interactions, so how do you do that? Is it enough to have a virtual coffee chat, or do you need to think about how we're gonna rethink our team buildings and make face-to-face time really, really meaningful? Like you know, once a year, a whole week, you all get together in order to connect people, align, bring them on the same page, have deeper connections with your colleagues to foster that understanding and empathy. Because that's the first thing I did actually when I joined as a remote worker. I spent the first 2 weeks in the headquarters with the people I now engage with every day on Zoom and all different portals. But the first thing I did was go there and build these connections face to face. And I don't think this will ever go away. You have to have it every day, because then sometimes these face-to-face meetings are not as productive. Because you know, if you think about a normal office, you don't get to choose who you spend half your life with, or even more than in an office space. So if you can have really good quality time, I think this is how you can still build a culture and build connections across the whole company.
It was interesting when we were, sorry, Melanie, when we were preparing for this webinar and running through some sort of questions and some topics, I challenged Melanie and Simon. I said, listen, I don't think culture is going to be that important anymore. I think that potentially when you're interviewing someone, you may make an exception, and okay, this person may not fit, maybe a bit strange, maybe a bit odd, but you know what, I only have to put up with this person for an hour a day. And Melanie and Simon both shot me down and said, no, listen, that's culture now is going to be more important than what it was. And I think that's an interesting thing, because if we don't, and I must say, I was talking a bit tongue in cheek when we were having our prep call, but when we do look at culture and we look at attrition, the old saying of, people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. And I think that's very true. Attrition, and unless you're really looking after your people and understand your people, that goes back to our first point of this workshop. Unless you understand people and what their motivations are and what they're feeling, you're never going to be able to retain them. Because you can't just sort of say, oh, he or she looks a bit down today. You're not going to see that, because if you're doing a 10-minute stand-up on Zoom and you've got 20 other faces you're looking at, you're not going to be able to see actually that person doesn't look like they're engaged, or maybe there's something going on. So unless you're having one-to-ones every single day, which in a big business obviously is going to be challenging, you need to make sure you're using some other tools to mitigate some of the attrition. I just want to run through this one last point on which is cost here as well, which is a risk when things start to get back to normal. It goes on to my previous slide, which is talking about having access to a wider talent pool. Talent, especially in fintech and payments, is expensive, right? Very, very skilled people, very sought after. I don't think that will change, and I'm going to come on to that in a moment. But what that's going to mean is if there are international, you're now competing with international businesses who are working in different, in fiat currencies, working in dollars or working in euros or working in sterling. They're going to be able to afford, especially with the exchange rates they are at the moment, they're going to be able to afford to overpay and outbid you. And I know it's not all about money, but let's be honest, I think there's going to be some people that, or a large part of the fintech world that's going to take serious knocks over this period, and is going to want to recoup. And if they can earn 20-30% more, people will. Let me be honest with you, people are going to move. Loyalty will come a second to actually, we need to build back up our savings. If we've had to delve into that, if I've been on furlough or I've been on temporary leave, whatever it may be, I need to build back up my reserves. I think the other thing, just to finish off on this point, is that we're not saying here throw away your bean bags and throw away your slides, your funky slides, if you've got a Google or Facebook type office, but you're going to need to come up with something that is still going to reward, maybe that's the wrong word, but is going to give that brand loyalty to your employees, whether that be, and I can't say I've got one, but one of these, backgrounds, or a really nice chair, or, dual monitors, or whatever it may be. People are going to have different needs and different requirements. And if you can make their lives easier and you can make their lives more enjoyable and more tolerable, then you have to do that, because they're going to be offered something else. And if someone's sitting here saying, well, you know what, I'm doing a relatively mundane job, and I'm not going to list any jobs for fear of annoying anyone on this call or anyone listening afterwards, but if I'm doing a fairly mundane role, and someone's coming and say to me, hey, listen, I'm going to give you 20% more to do exactly the same thing, why would I say no? There's going to be very few people. So you need to build up your value proposition as an employer. You need to really work on your management frameworks, because they think they need to be changed or adopted to suit a dispersed team or disparate team. And I think you need to think of ways in which you can bring people or gain some brand loyalty within your business. It's going to be key. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of people, and it's going to become very, very expensive. So here, actually, I think we've covered a few of these off right just now. But Melanie, I know you helped me put this together. So we were talking right at the early stage of this workshop about bringing people into a business. How do you bring in junior people? And let's be honest, we create funnels in our businesses. So we have, young talent coming in, and we nurture them, and we develop, and they become future leaders. At least that's the plan anyway. If you've got someone that's got zero experience, zero job experience or work experience, or is very, very junior, I know in certain my business, when we bring someone on, I tend to, tend to shadow me or one of my senior people for, a couple of weeks, and you're literally sitting there having conversations. Now you can't do that on Zoom. I mean, we talk about Zoom fatigue, and imagine doing that for an entire day. I mean, it's, wouldn't bear thinking about. So how do you do that? How do you bring on new trainees and new graduates? How do you fill your talent pool? So that's one thing. I can run through this list, and then maybe we'll pick one or two. Have the needs of employees changed? We've covered that, I think, at the early stage. Management frameworks, as I've just mentioned. What's your selection criteria now? Has that changed? Are you going to go through, not necessarily my school of thought, but are you going to be a bit more relaxed when it comes to fit in your business? Because if someone's working from home, actually, I don't need to see them. But if they're really good at what they're doing, then I can make, an exception. They're not going to, disrupt my all my team. So is that going to be part of your selection criteria now? You're going to relax that, or are you going to make it harder? Your values. A lot of companies have got values and mission statements that were written probably by a marketing department X amount of years ago. I think you need to look at them now. Are they relevant? Really, are they relevant? People are going to buy into your values and buy into your mission, because if you're just another company, they'll just go to another company that's going to pay them a little bit more, or give them a couple of, maybe 3 monitors rather than 2. So what are your values, and how do you get your values across to people when they're not in your office, when they're not seeing your funky bean bags and all your lovely art on your walls? How do you get that across? And I think that's a really big thing. And then the last point is, how do you change your recruitment strategy? How do you make it so you are hiring the best people that you can afford, rather than the best people who just happen to be local to where your office is? You have to start thinking about that, because otherwise you will miss this opportunity. And I say opportunity, every 15, 20 years or so, these things happen, right? We don't need to go sort of in history, or every 10 years, I think it is on the economic side. There's always opportunities, and there are always companies that capitalize on them. If you don't, promise you someone else will. Promise you your competitors will. So you need to start thinking about how you're going to start looking at your talent, and we're going to come back to that. I hope, if we've got time. I hope we've got time shortly. But Melanie, Simon, you want to pick maybe one of these each, and sort of elaborate a little bit, maybe a couple of minutes on each.
Yeah. Let me talk about values, because that's something I look at a lot. And also when I prepared on our call today, I thought about this, and I said exactly the same thing there that you just said. Every company has some kind of values. They might be on your website, they might be somewhere in the internet, but they're written statements. And the question is just really, do you as a company and your whole workforce, do you live and breathe these values? Because a funky beanbag is not, it has nothing to do with values. It's a piece of furniture. So, and you don't need that. And but then really think about what are the core values as a company, and how did we define our core values? Do we need to maybe change them now to fit the situation, or maybe they're really good, but we haven't really thought about how do we actually act according to our core values, to really have examples and live according to them, and especially for management, go and act as a prime example to really act on what's written in your company statement. And when people feel that values are not just somewhere on the wall, but it's really ingrained in how you're being treated and how you treat by your management, by your colleagues, how you treat your colleagues, also how you deal with your clients and partners. And if you can get this tangible, and I know it's not easy to get this right, but it's definitely worth to think about it. And especially if you had employees who struggled a little bit with feeling connected to your company because there is a lack of lived values, now then that could actually be a time and a chance to turn things around and really create positive surprises, and strengthen that loyalty and how people feel about your company.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to that original point, which is, get a pulse of how people are feeling. And unless you know how people are feeling, it's very difficult to come up with any type of sort of solutions. And if people are feeling disconnected, you kind of need to know that, right? If there are people you want to retain, you need to focus on that and focus on their pain points. Melanie, thank you. Simon, anything you'd like to add on one of these points?
I think I'd come off the back of that and also then into the selection criteria. I think one of the interesting phenomena of the last few weeks is that people are, everybody is questioning stuff, aren't they? Everybody is questioning, I've been doing this job, I've been buying all this stuff online, or I've been shopping. What is stuff for anymore? And I think what we're going to see, and I think it's being mirrored. It's something we're going to see in the investment markets, in asset management, is this move, this shift to investing in companies that have purpose, companies that are, environmentally focused, have socially responsible goals. In our case, in investing in financial inclusion or enabling more access to services that the people in poorer places in general need, and that does play into values. I think there's a huge kind of thing. There's a lot to be said now, or there's a lot more to be said for thinking about your company's purpose, its mission, because that's a way to, it's a way to think about values. It's also a way to build culture. It's also a way to have loyal, engaged, motivated staff. And then you take that into selection area. The opportunity now is, yes, we might in the longer term see places, to your point, South Africa being able to get access to staff that they wouldn't have had access to previously because of geographic restrictions. We're also going to see access to people that had to stay at home and weren't able to join the workforce. Whether it's women looking after children, possibly disabled people. So we're going to see access to parts of the populations that we couldn't access before. So I think the selection criteria thing is I would say it's a positive thing. It's you might have to think how you calibrate that based on the new reality, but I think ultimately firms should be thinking about the increased flexibility this is going to give to their workforce and increased opportunity for people that really couldn't get access to the workforce before.
And it's a great point. And Melanie, we said we'd cover this, right? Which is the diversity and the inclusion side. And it's really, really important. I think that there's been, again, maybe not so much in parts of Europe or certainly the US, but certainly here on the African continent, there has always been this stigma against, the women with children or, women in general, quite frankly. I think this whole, if there's one positive we can take out of all of this, is that actually people can work remotely. People don't need to travel for 2 hours to get to your office and then feel bad that, their child has been, sick at school and they have to then go and leave and get docked pay for doing that. I mean, for me, that's archaic. I can't believe companies still do that, although they do, and it's prevalent across the African continent. Employment laws here in South Africa are, very, very challenging on both sides. But I do think, diversity, a company can be diverse. They can have lots of different, I didn't say lots of different genders because that's actually true now, right? So I've learned over the last couple of years, there's not just two genders. Anyway, we're not going down that rabbit hole. They're lots of different types of backgrounds of people. And, when you are building fintech and payments businesses, you typically your product's probably going to talk to a different types of demographics. So it's important that your business represents those different demographics, right? There was a comment that's just come in, and I'm just going to take that quickly because I just want to finish off the deck here. But is there an issue with multicultural, multi-continent workforces? For example, European countries take very long lunch breaks, but other countries don't believe that. So there's a potential for conflict. Is it more for focusing on deliverables and less focusing on idiosyncrasies? I'm going to take that question because I want to get to the next bit. Absolutely. Listen, I think all right. The world's become smaller. Okay, so the world's become smaller, which means we need to be cognizant and sensitive to other cultures and how other people conduct work. Now, just because we or you, and I know where you're based, but I'm not going to say that in your country have a certain way of working. I think you need to I think everyone needs to look at, I'm going to get the best talent. And if they take a longer lunch break, so be it, right? It takes me 2 hours to drop my kids at school because of the traffic. That's just life. And I think just being able to be, again, I think there's another lesson that we've all learned from what's gone on here is that we need to be human. We all have lives outside of work, and there has been now this mix of work and life, and work-life balance. You know, I think it's taken a whole new different meaning now. So I think we need to embrace that. We need to embrace other cultures. We need to embrace other types of generations and genders and everything else there is in diversity. So I hope that answered your question. Right, I'm going to get on to the last bit because I promised myself in five episodes I've not talked about recruitment, and this is my opportunity to do that. So I'm going to do it now. I'm going to make it quick, okay? So is this a war for jobs or a war for talent? Right? What is the difference here? Right? So war for jobs is there's mass unemployment and everyone's now looking for a job and everyone's on the market, everyone's applying for every job that there is. What's a war for talent? Well, the opposite. So it's classic supply and demand. You know, we need people, let's call it software engineers in, you know, South Africa, which are like gold dust. You know, we need to find software engineers and we still need to find them, but there's a lack of supply. So we have to start looking at innovative ways to try and attract people to our brand. So which one is it? Which one are we going to go into post COVID-19? My view is we go into both. I think there's going to be two layers, and I've split this in terms of, and I mean this with the greatest respect to anyone that's operating in these sectors, or in these verticals. But if we look at sort of marketing, HR, operations, finance, there is going to be, when companies are looking at retrenching or looking at right sizing, that they are typically the first parts of an organization that get downsized, right? Because they're not necessarily revenue generating, they're a cost. So that naturally happens, which means there's going to be an influx of those types of people on the market. We're seeing it now. I was talking to a travel tech company on Monday. They've let 70% of their workforce go. 70%, right? Not in software engineering, right? Not necessarily in their leadership team, certainly not in their product team, but in all those areas in blue listed there. So that's where there's going to be an influx of people on the market. Where there's going to be a lack of supply is going to be on the four white boxes that I've mentioned there, and perhaps some other areas as well, but certainly commercial, certainly technology. There's always going to be demand, high demand for technology, good technology skills. Leadership talent, you know, people are going to, there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of success stories out of the back of, you know, this situation, people that have come through, that have pulled a business through, that have pivoted, that have right sized, that have really made it through this process. And then there's obviously the product. There's a company that we've mentioned a few times or alluded to a few times on this series here in Cape Town, who are a POS company, and you know, unfortunately they've had to let a large chunk of their workforce go, but not their product team, not their leadership team, not their technology team, and so far not their commercial team. So I think that just reinforces my message there, that it will be in pockets. There will be a war for talent that will still continue, but there also is going to be an influx. So if we look at the influx of talent, you know, I think some of the traditional ways of finding people will still work. What you're going to have to do as a business is refine how you hire, how you select people. Going back to Simon's point, you know, we ran a test the other day. We posted a role which we don't usually advertise, but we posted something online. We had 470 responses in 3 days. 470 in 3 days. Crazy, huh? And that's the start, yeah, relative start, early stages of the pandemic happening.
I might have one last thought to offer, and it's about, you know, when we come out of this, when we go back to normality, whatever this might look like, as a company, there might be some positive things for your employees that are happening at the moment, especially having the flexibility to work from home, but some might actually prefer going to the office. So I know we said, oh, you could, you know, go and become a distributed company. I don't think you have to go become a distributed company. You don't have to go back to how things were. Just be mindful about and just use the service again that Darren mentioned and offered. Just see what worked well, what didn't work well, and don't take away the positive things that might have come out of that. And so when it's about, you know, you can open offices again, don't force everyone to come back to the office, do a survey, check how do people feel about it, what do they prefer, what needs to be in place for them to actually be at the office, and keep that flexibility that was forced upon us now.
Absolutely, thank you. Very important points. Is you know, what are the learnings from this? What are the positives that we can take out of the situation? And how can we, you know, remodel, redesign our businesses to not take advantage, but to make good of what's been just the most surreal situation I think any of us have ever seen in our lives, and probably ever will see. Right, Simon? Any last musings for this afternoon?
No, I think you covered it all very nicely. I mean, it's been a human crisis, obviously a health one, but ultimately the kind of most of us have experienced the sort of psychological end of the lockdown. And I think for us as managers, founders, whatever we are, we've got to think, we've got to respond in a human way to the people that we're working with or work for us, both about managing with working from home now, but also as Melanie, as you said, back going, when things start to open up and there's an opportunity to go back to the office. Many people in London, for example, I've spoken to clients that are really not thinking that they're going to be or wanting to be back in an office, or certainly not going to big large industry events for until next year. So I think many people are feeling that way, that 2020 is really sadly kind of a write-off, so it's a little bit gloomy possibly, but I think if that's the baseline, then I think I think for us as I say, for us as managers, we have to think about how we get people sort of to manage the transition over the next 6 months, and and let your be guided by your people. Don't feel that you have to have all the answers.
Absolutely. I think that brings it to a wrap. We only overran by 6 minutes. That's not too bad. Melanie, thank you so much. Your insights have been great. We really appreciate you spending time talking to us, and thank you to the team at Entersekt as well for allowing you some time to talk to us and sharing your story. So we really appreciate that. Thank you, Simon, as ever. Great to have you on board. And next week is our final one, albeit we may extend the series because we've had some great feedback. Next week we're joined by George Anderson, who's actually my career or my personal coach. He's done some amazing work with me, and if he can coach me, believe me, he can coach anyone. So please tune in for that. He's going to give some amazing tips on resilience. How you can really take this as a positive, some real practical tools, some takeaways. He's appeared at EWPN, which is the European Women in Payments events, at Money 2020 last year. He's a great guy. Please do join. It's an hour that I promise you won't regret. So please join in next week. I'll send an email out. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And Melanie, Simon, thank you. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Aaron. Have a great day. Bye, Melanie.
Take care.